Welcome to the Rum Revival. My name is Arminder, and today we are talking about this box right here. Now this is something that a lot of people have been waiting for a very long time, myself included, and this is both the coolest rum thing I have, but also maybe the nerdiest. This is the newest release from Hampden Estate in Jamaica. This is their 8 marks collection. Now this is one fancy box right here. It's really well constructed and I really like doing this for some reason. Now of course the question asked is what exactly is in the box? Well, let's open it up. Inside you will find a double-sided sheet of paper, more on this a little later, and you will find 8 200 milliliter bottles of rum. Now these 8 rums are all 8 of the unaged distillates that Hampden Estate makes. These are the only rums that Hampden produces from fermentation all the way through distillation. And these 8 rums serve as the building blocks for Hampden to create all of their commercial releases. So if you're wondering what a mark is, that's basically it. It's the unaged distillates that a distillery produces, and each one is a specific rum that tastes and smells a specific way because it's made by a very specific recipe or production process. It's not a blended rum, but instead it's the components that form the basis of a blend. That being said, a mark can absolutely be released either unaged or aged by itself as a commercial release. And in fact, Hampden does both of those two things, but we'll get to that when we actually get into these individual marks. So now that we understand what marks are and the role they serve a distillery, let's get back to this box. Essentially, this is a tasting or sampling kit, but it's actually much more than that, and that's because of this sheet here. Now the sheet here takes the collection from a mere tasting kit to a full-on rum education, and it immerses you into how Hampden Estate operates. Not only does the sheet explain what a mark is, it breaks down each mark, providing some background information on it, and then through some charts, it shows us how it's made by basically giving us a sketch of its specific recipe or production process. It covers the type and quantity of raw materials required for fermentation, the length of fermentations, and the distillation methods required to create these marks. Now, the other thing this sheet covers is esters. See, Hampden and really every Jamaican distillery classifies each of their marks by account of a specific ester that's present within that mark. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's an ester? Good question. Well, it's one of the types of organic compounds created during the production process that contributes much of the flavor and aroma of a spirit. Esters are created when an alcohol molecule bonds to an acid molecule. Now, depending on the type of alcohol molecule and the type of acid molecule, you get a different kind of ester. And each ester has a different profile. One might have notes of ripe banana, another might have notes of nail polish remover, and another might have notes of pineapple. Now, depending on the variety and concentration of esters present, the mark will taste and smell different than another mark. So I'm not gonna really dive too much into it, but just know that esters make up such an incredibly small percentage of a rum, like less than 1% of its total composition. And also know that the higher that the ester count is, the more intensity of flavor and aroma is gonna be present in that mark. You know how like Jamaican rums are considered pungent and funky? Well, that's all thanks to the relative high levels of esters that are present. So this sheet here not only lists the ester count for each mark, it also provides some chemical analysis. For each mark, it shows the mix of esters that are present and what their relative proportions are in relation to one another. Now, all of this information is like a rum nerd's dream. This is like the kind of deep dive that I wish every single distillery would offer consumers. Now, maybe your average consumer might not care, but if you do, it just makes you appreciate the rums that much more. In this set, each mark is bottled unaged, so there's no wood aging notes to kind of alter the flavor profile of the mark. And each one is bottled at 60% ABV, so you can really experience the mark without too much dilution. Now, each mark is identified by a series of letters or symbols, basically acronyms, and this is a pretty common practice across Jamaican distilleries. Usually these acronyms refer to individuals tied to the distillery over the course of its history, or maybe it's a reference to an old historical still, or how the mark was classified for blending purposes. Now, the marks are presented here and in the sheet in order of their ester count. So I'll feature each one from the lowest to the highest. And as I go through them, I'll cover Hampden's production processes. Let's go. Let's start off with the very first mark, OWH. Now that stands for Outram Wormald Hussey, who is the great-grandfather of the current owners of Hampden, the Hussey family. Now OWH is actually one of the newest marks created by Hampden. When the Hussey family bought the estate, they created it in the early 2010s. So the raw materials used during fermentation to create this are just molasses and water, which is basically typical of most rum fermentations throughout the world. Now the sugar content of molasses by itself is too high to allow for fermentation to take place, so the water dilutes it down to the point where yeast can actually start eating up the sugars to create alcohol. Speaking of yeast, all of Hampden's 8 marks are wild fermented, meaning no yeast is added to the mix of molasses and water. Instead, the diluted down molasses is placed in open cedar vats where the ambient yeast in the air naturally start fermentation. And there's actually a variety of ambient wild yeast present, and when they start fermenting, they're each going to be creating their own unique flavors, ultimately leading to a rum with much more wilder and funkier notes than if a single controlled yeast strain was used instead. For OWH, the fermentation lasts a total of 3 days. Now, after fermentation, it's distilled on any one of Hampden's 6 double retort pot stills. And really all 8 marks can be distilled on any one of those 6 pot stills, and they all come out of that still at around 86% ABV. I'm not actually gonna go in too much into distillation for the rest of the marks because it's fairly uniform across all of them, and for the purposes of this kit, most of the esters and flavor compounds are created during fermentation. Now, between the 3-day fermentation and the fact that it's wild fermented, you end up with an ester count for OWH of between 40 to 80 grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol. Now, let's not get too worried and caught up about what exactly a hectoliter of pure alcohol means. Just focus on the numbers as a source of comparison as we go through all the marks. Now, even though OWH has the lowest ester count for Hampden, 40 to 80 grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol, that's actually fairly high relative to, say, something like a lighter Cuban or Puerto Rican style white rum. This still has plenty of flavor and personality and character compared to a lot more milder rums that are out there. Alrighty, let's give this a try. Ooh, I can already smell it. Oh, that smells so good. So I'm getting like a touch of salinity. Now in terms of fruit, I'm getting like pear, like maybe spiced pear, and some pineapples, but also some apples. Now none of this fruit is like overly rotten or overripe. Yeah, that's really good. Oh, so I get, there's a couple things I'm getting here. I'm getting some pear, but I'm also getting melon. Yeah, melon, and then like a touch of olive-like salinity, and there's like this really zippy black pepper as well. Oh, that's really nice, and I really like what is going on in my mouth right now. I really like the aftertaste. The aftertaste, or what I'm tasting in my mouth now, is kind of candy-ish. Yeah, maybe Nerds. Yeah, like a mixed flavor of Nerds. Now, in terms of how Hampden uses OWH, it's actually the mark used in their flagship Hampden 8-year release. Yeah, this rum is made up of entirely OWH that was aged 8 years in ex-bourbon casks. So if you can get your hands on both of these, it'd be fun to do like a side-by-side to get a sense of what the wood does to the mark. So the next mark is LFCH, which stands for Lawrence Francis Close Hussey, who was the son of Outram Hussey of OWH fame, and who was the head of the Hussey family at the time that they purchased Hampden Estate. Like OWH, LFCH was created when the family bought the estate. Also, as with OWH, the raw materials for fermentation are just molasses and water. Now, where fermentation for OWH is 3 days, here the wild fermentation lasts for 4 days total. So what's a longer fermentation time mean? Well, it means that there are more opportunities for esters to be created. There's more time for acid molecules to bond to alcohol molecules to create all those lovely esters. Now, thanks to that extra day of fermentation, the ester count here is 80 to 120 grams instead of OHW's 40 to 80. The thing to note is that that extra day of fermentation doesn't just mean we're getting more of the same esters, we're also getting some new esters that aren't present in OWH, and altogether we're getting the esters in different concentrations and proportions. Now, given that mix and makeup, it results in a different flavor profile. Let's give it a try. You know, on initial kind of sniffing, on the nose, I actually feel like it's lighter in terms of aroma than the OWH. As you let it sit a little bit, then some light fruitiness comes out, like a little bit of strawberry jam and a touch of olive. All right, let's give it a taste. Ooh. Yeah, that is different than OWH for sure. I'm getting like candied berries and a light touch of tea and diesel. It's not aggressively diesel, just like a hint of diesel. That tea is actually kind of nice. I'm getting a little olive brininess. You know, I like that a lot. Those candied berries are delicious. In terms of releases from Hampden, the last 2 annual Great House releases, the 2021 and the 2022, have some LFCH in them. The 2021 is about half LFCH and the 2022 is about a little over a quarter. Next up is LROK, or LROK as I like to call it, and that stands for Light Rum Owen Kelly. Now, Owen Kelly was the name of one of the previous families that owned Hampden. Starting with LROK is where things start getting really interesting in terms of Hampden's production. So LROK and the remaining 5 marks that I haven't tried yet still use molasses and water, but then Hampden actually uses less of both of them in the fermentation and add in 2 additional ingredients, cane juice vinegar and dunder. Now let's talk a little bit about both. Cane juice vinegar or cane acid is just fresh pressed cane juice that has been allowed to sit and naturally ferment to the point that it becomes acidic, turning into cane acid. Now, dunder at its simplest is the leftover remains of previous distillations. It's the mix of water, acids, and other organic components that didn't pass through and turn into rum. So what's the purpose of including both in the fermentation when all you really need is water and molasses to make rum? Well, first off, know that I'm kind of simplifying here a bit, but both add a lot of acid into the mix. Why is that important? Again, the higher the presence of acids in the fermentation mix, the more esters that can be created in the final rum. And the more esters that we have, the higher intensity of flavor in the mark. For LROK, the fermentation with the inclusion of low amounts of cane juice vinegar and dunder lasts 3 days. Now, normally we would then just move on to distillation like we do with OWH and LFCH, but starting with LROK, and for the other remaining marks, there's a middle step, a secondary fermentation that happens when something called muck is added to the mix. So muck is this thick ooze that is made in part of dunder, the leftover remains of cane stalks, and yeast found at the bottom of fermentation tanks. Now, given time, this mix begins to decompose and rot, creating this crazy intense mix of acids and bacteria. So muck adds an even more crazier amount of acids to the fermentation mix. And again, more acids lead to more esters, and for LROK, this secondary fermentation lasts 2 days. Now, with all of those new additions of cane acid, of dunder, and muck, it bumps up the ester count of LROK to 200 to 400 grams. Let's give this a try. So I get a little bit of citrus brightness, like maybe some lime. So now I'm actually picking up some notes of rotting fruit that I wasn't really getting in the other 2 marks. But there's also some black tea there, and like a touch of glue and some brininess. All right, let's give it a sip. Woo! Oh yeah. Yeah. So it's a little tangy or tart. Also get like a little bit of like spice note, like maybe allspice, or a bit of anise, anise, I don't know, one of those 2. And on the fruit front, I'm getting like slightly charred pineapple, getting a touch of like mango and banana as well. Now this is definitely a step up in terms of intensity, both in terms of like mouthfeel and just overall funk. In terms of a commercial release for LROK, last year Hampden had released the Younger, which was an aged LROK of 5 years. Now, a couple years prior to that, Hampden had also released an 11-year-old LROK as well. Next up is HLCF, which stands for Hampden Light Continental Flavored. As with LROK, LFCH uses the same medium levels of molasses and water and the same low amounts of cane juice vinegar, dunder, and muck. Now, where HLCF differs from LROK is an additional 2 days of the secondary fermentation. And with those 2 extra days, we end up with an ester count of 400 to 600 grams. And the other thing to note is, of all the 8 marks, HLCF might have the most varied types of esters present, which creates this complex yet balanced flavor profile. Let's give it a try. Oh yeah. God, I could smell this all day. So I get a little bit of like maybe glue, but really the main note is this really delicious rotten banana and a little bit of pog juice. Yeah. And I'm also getting like a fermented pineapple fruit cocktail. Oh yeah, I mean, come on. So I get 2 things that are kind of different, very different, but it kind of works. I get like this oily gasoline note, but also get like a perfume note at the same time. Yeah, and I'm getting some spice, like maybe some allspice or like a peppery note. But the thing that I love is all in the finish, is this strawberry banana finish. Yeah, but not just like any kind of strawberry banana. Like, it's not strawberries and bananas, it's strawberry banana yogurt is kind of what it evokes in my mind. And gosh, I feel like when I was younger, there were so many things that were flavored like strawberry banana flavored, but now as an adult, I feel like I never come across it. I mean, I guess maybe there's still strawberry banana yogurt and maybe strawberry banana baby food, but as an adult, I would like more things flavored strawberry banana. Now, in terms of Hampden's commercial releases, HLCF in its unaged form and proof down to 63% ABV is famously known as Rumfire. Yeah, Rumfire is 100% HLCF. So this is one of my favorite rums, so as you can imagine, that makes HLCF my favorite Hampden mark. And it just has this amazing aroma and great finish, and it mixes so well in cocktails. Additionally, in the coming months here in the US, Hampden will be introducing a new core rum into their range, HLCF Classic, which is HLCF aged 4 years and bottled at 60% ABV. Next up is Diamond Age. As with LROK and HLCF, it uses the same medium levels of water and molasses, but now it bumps up the amount of cane juice, vinegar, dunder, and muck. Now, primary fermentation lasts 3 days, but now the secondary fermentation goes up to 7 days from HLCF's 4. And that pushes the ester count to 900 to 1,000 grams, and that's pretty high ester territory. So let's give this a try. So I gotta imagine most people who smell this are immediately gonna identify the nose as nail polish remover. Yeah, a little bit of brine, like some olive brine. You know, now, once you get used to that though, you start picking up some notes of like rotting tropical fruit. Yeah, but it's crazy to me how different this smells from HLCF. Whoa. Wow. That is no joke. That packs a delayed punch. God, and leaves your mouth dry. Whew. So there's a little bit of black pepper, a touch of iodine, but there's also still like some like charred pineapple there as well. God, that really dries your mouth. So like on subsequent sips, I'm now picking up like stewed down tropical fruits, like really rich, concentrated tropical fruit cocktail syrup. Yeah. Now, Diamond Age has been used by Hampden primarily in their earlier Great House releases. 20% of the blend of the 2019 and the 2020 releases were aged Diamond Age. Next up is HGML, which stands for Hampden George Farquhar Lawson, who was a previous owner. So with the HGML, the overall quantities of molasses, water, dunder, and muck are about the same as Diamond H, but the amount of cane juice vinegar is increased. So the primary fermentation lasts 5 days, and then the secondary fermentation is bumped up 3 extra days from the Diamond H for a total of 10 days. This gets us to an ester count of 1,000 to 1,100 grams. Let's give it a try. Okay, so this nose is a bit of a departure because I'm getting like milk chocolate and vanilla custard. That being said, there is like a little bit of a sharp nail polish remover note. And I'm getting a little bit of fruit, but it's light and it's mostly banana. Wow, that's a lot of esters. There's a lot going on. So this is the first one where I could feel like a really significant difference in the mouthfeel, and it's sweeter. It's clearly much more richer than like all of these other marks so far. It's like a pineapple syrup. And on the finish, I'm also like getting a touch of that strawberry banana note that I was getting like on HLCF. It's not as strong as Rumfire, but I get hints of that strawberry banana. Wow, that's really cool. Now, in terms of using HGML in their commercial releases, almost 3/4 of the 2022 Great House is aged HGML. And I remember thinking at the time when I first tried this, like, wow, this is so much sweeter than the other Great House releases. And I wasn't sure why or how that was happening, but now having tried the unaged HGML, I totally get it. Next up is C Diamond H. Here the amount of cane acid, dunder, and muck are pretty high. We're basically firing on all cylinders here. So fermentation time from HGML is essentially doubled at 10 days for the primary fermentation, and then the secondary fermentation is 10 days long. And so we're really talking about pretty high amounts of acid and very long fermentation times. All of that to mean that we're gonna make so many esters, 1,300 to 1,400 grams to be exact. Let's give it a try. So the nose on this is kind of a bit of a left turn. So I'm getting some smoke, but I'm also getting some concrete and a little bit of rubber. That's not to say there isn't some fruit. There is. It's not as much as some of the other marks. I'm primarily getting some baked banana. Whoa. Wow. That is intense. There's a lot going on. So there's some contradictions here. It's both floral and dirty at the same time. It's both brighter, but it's also acidic and vinegary. And it has, and don't take this the wrong way, I'm not saying this is bad, but it has like a rotting quality that tastes a little bit like vomit. Yeah, like vomit in a good way, I guess. Now the finish is all like fermented pineapple. It's a very long finish. Now, as far as I know, Hampden hasn't really released something themselves that contains C Diamond H, either within a core range rum or a special release rum, but there have been plenty of single mark, even single cask releases of it from third-party bottlers. Now, instead of, or even in addition to using their marks for their own commercial releases, a distillery like Hampden can sell their marks either unaged or aged to third parties. In some cases, they might sell to a rum broker that buys casks and then who sells those casks to independent bottlers, like something like a Holmes Keep. In other cases, Hampden might sell that cask directly to a third party, like Velier. Now, most of Hampden's marks have been sold in both of these manners. And the final mark is DOK, which stands for Dermot Owen Kelly Lawson. Now, Dermot was Hampden's distiller at the start of the 20th century and was the grandson of George Mafarquhar Lawson of HGML fame. So here, like with C Diamond H, we have really high levels of cane juice vinegar, dunder, and muck. Fermentation time is the same as C Diamond H, 10 days, but the secondary fermentation is 5 days longer for a total of 15 days. All of this creates esters that are between 1,500 to 1,600 grams. And actually 1,600 grams per hectoliter of pure alcohol is the legal limit in Jamaica for an ester count for a rum. Now, distilleries like Hampden are actually capable of producing rums with much more higher ester count, but due to the law, Hampden stops at DOK. Now, what's interesting about DOK is that even though it's got the highest ester count of Hampden's marks, when it comes to the variety of esters that are present, it's actually the least diverse. With all that out of the way, let's give it a try. Okay, so this is really interesting. I said the previous one, the C Diamond H, was a bit of a left turn, but this is like two sharp left turns, frankly, which means we're just kind of going back the way we came, which is not what I mean. It's a left turn and then a right turn, which means we're going in the same direction that we were going. So no, how about, let's just say it's taken a right turn. It's weird to describe this, but on the nose, I'm getting like a lot of umami and some like funkiness and a little bit of iodine and a bit of that vomit that I was getting with C Diamond H. Yeah, that umami note, it's the first time I'm getting this umami note in any of these marks. Whoa, that is intense. Yeah, that is no joke. There's a lot there. So this has so much concentrated flavor. It's packed so tightly. I get a little bit of like umami savoriness, but midway through I get that acidic vomit. Now as it begins to dissipate on the palate, I'm simultaneously getting a little bit of pineapple, but also the taste of licking a battery. Yeah. Though that being said, I think the finish is pretty decent. Don't let the battery part kind of throw you. I have had DOK age, God, was it 5 years or 6 years aged? Whatever it was. And I think that's probably a lot more of an approachable rum than this unaged. But I'm glad I got to try it. Glad I had access to it. So DOK has been released through a number of independent bottler releases, including from Habitation Velier and SBS. So historically, DOK and the other marks from Hampden have been used as blending components by merchants and rum brokers. Brokers buy aged and unaged marks from distilleries all over the world, and they can then blend all sorts of marks together to create a custom blend for a brand. These really high ester marks like DOK, with just a small amount, can really add a lot of flavor and aroma to a rum that might otherwise be pretty mild and cheaper to make. In addition, these high ester marks like DOK are often used in very small quantities for their aromatic qualities in things like perfume and confectionaries like chocolate.
So yeah, maybe DOK wasn't really designed to be drunk straight, but hey, here we are. I'm kind of tempted to kind of see how it does, kind of as like a perfume or a cologne. So let's do a little bit of that. Yeah. Well, there you go. That's my breakdown of all 8 of the marks. So I've seen this priced anywhere between $140 to $165. I think that's kind of a bargain for what you get. 8 rums, and sure they're unaged, but they're all 60% ABV. And sure, each bottle is only 200 milliliters, but altogether you're looking at a little more than 2 750 milliliter bottles worth of rum. And there have been like some Habitation Value releases of these marks, also unaged, and those have sold for like over $100. So given all that, I actually think this is priced pretty competitively. So would I recommend this? Well, I think if you're a relative newbie to rum, you might not appreciate this as much. This isn't really a beginner kind of experience. I think the higher ester stuff and the fact that it's all unaged might be a bit of a turn-off for beginners, but I would easily and wholeheartedly recommend this if you're a fan of Hampden Estate or just Jamaican rum in general. There is so much to learn and experience here that I think if you really take the time to read the information on the sheet and spend time with each rum separately, as well as comparing and contrasting them together in tastings, well, I can't think of a better rum experience, except for maybe doing this at the distillery itself, which would be kind of amazing. But outside of that, as a self-guided experience, this is absolutely top notch. Well, there you go. That's my review and tasting of the 8 Marks collection from Hampden Estate. So I hope this was informative and educational, and I hope it helped you kind of wrap your head around what esters are, what marks are, and I hope it gave you a better understanding of Hampden's unique production process. So I've been pretty vocal that HLCF is my favorite Hampden mark, but I'd love to know what all of yours are. Is it DOK all the way? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you next time. Cheers.